Hi, I'm Sean McGowan. In this lesson, we're going to get acquainted with some basic jazz chord vocabulary that will get you started in building your own solo guitar arrangements, reading through chord charts, and comping for other soloists in an ensemble situation. The key to understanding how to play any chord, even complex chords like E major 9 sharp 11 for example, is to learn what the fundamental sound and structure are for whatever chord you'd like to build. You don't need to memorize a ton of chord fingerings without any understanding of the internal function of the notes. It's much better to understand how to build chords from the ground up. As we work through the following examples, we're going to learn how to come up with essential voicings for any chord symbol you're likely to encounter in a jazz tune, and also how to utilize each voice in the chord to create the sound that you want. Eventually, you'll use them to harmonize a melody, play on top of a bass line, and even comp for yourself while improvising a solo. This lesson can be found in my Fingerstyle Jazz Guitar Essentials lesson series, published by Acoustic Guitar and available at acousticguitar.com. Even if you're a little familiar with playing jazz music, then you're probably aware that chords commonly referred to as jazz chords often include a wider variety of notes than the chords found in most rock, blues, and other popular genres. A great way to start to understand these chords is to pare them down to compact three-note voicings, which we'll call guide tone voicings. These voicings are a great way to outline the essential harmony of a chord progression. Guide tones are simply the third and seventh notes of a chord, or sometimes the third and sixth if the chord is just a simple triad or a sixth chord. Guide tone voicings have long been popular with jazz musicians. Guitarists Grant Green and Jim Hall immediately come to mind with their comping and usage of guide tones. For this approach, let's imagine that the guitar strings are split into three distinct groups, each with its own unique role. The two lowest strings, the low E and the A string, will be reserved for playing just the root notes of our chords. The two guide tones will be played on the middle strings, the D and G strings. And finally, the high E and B strings will be reserved for chord extensions, notes like the 9th, 11th, and 13th, and later on, the melody in a full solo guitar arrangement. Let's call chords with the root on the 6th, the low E string, root 6 chords, and chords with the root on the 5th string, the A string, root 5 chords. That will give us two different options for each chord. Example 1 illustrates root 5 and root 6 voicings for guide tone C major 7th and C minor 7th chords. It's important to notice how the guide tones invert from one string to the other, depending on which string has the root. For example, a root 5 voicing places the third of the chord on the D string and the 7th on the G string, whereas a root 6 voicing is exactly the opposite. Here's example 1. C major 7, root 5. C major 7, root 6. So you'll notice that the two guide tones have actually flip-flopped. The third was here for the root 5 and the 7th on the G string, and now the 7th is on the D string and the third on the G string. And here's a root 5 C minor 7 and a root 6 C minor 7. The beautiful thing is that all of these voicings are movable and transposable, and they're very usable in their sound. Therefore, it's important to get acquainted with each of the different shapes in examples 2A and 2B. So here are some root 5 guide tone voicings. C major 7, C minor 7, C dominant 7, C6, C minor 6, and also C diminished 7, C minor 7 flat 5, and C minor major 7. Example 2B, their equivalents with a root 6 voicing. Here's C major 7, C minor 7, C dominant 7, C6, C minor 6, and also C fully diminished 7th, C minor 7 flat 5, and C minor major 7. Now let's apply some of these voicings using simple 2-5-1 progressions in the key of C. Example 3 shows a D minor 7, G7, C major 7 progression using simple guide tone voicings. Here's example 3. 1, 2, 3, and... 2, 3, and... Notice how little movement is required to move from each chord to the next. This creates a really smooth motion that ties each chord together nicely, and this concept is known as voice leading. Pay attention to where the third and seventh notes are in each voicing. You can also add some variation to the inner voices to create extra movement within your progression. In example 4, we're going to substitute the major third of a G7th with a fourth, creating a guide tone voicing for G7 sus4. We're also adding a C6 chord to the end of measure 2. Here's example 4. 1, 2, 3, and... Again, 3, 4. Example 5 shows another possibility, a minor major 7th chord moving to a minor 6th tonic chord. Now let's work through a chord progression of a tune, applying the concept of voice leading using these simple 3-note voicings. This etude is titled Leaves of Red and Gold and is based on a jazz standard called Autumn Leaves. 1, 2, 3, and... You can also add some rhythmic variety to these to make them a little bit more musical sounding. These are very usable and very musical sounding voicings. Just to give you a quick example of how you can do this, just add some rhythmic variety to these voicings. 1, 2, 3, and... and so on and so forth. Once you're familiar with the basic guide tone shapes, you can start applying additional textures on top by adding chord extensions. The key is to understand the foundation of the complex chords. For example, G major 9, G major 13, and G major 9 sharp 11 are all essentially G major 7th chords. You're just decorating that G major 7th with some different colors on top to create a nice texture. Let me show you exactly what I mean. Here's a guide tone fingering for a G major 7th chord, and then a G major 9th chord. You'll see that it's exactly the same foundation, or first floor, if you will, with a 9th on top. And the 13th on top is just this E on the high string, but you still have this fundamental G major 7th guide tone shape. It's the same thing with root 6 voicings. Here's your G major 7, G major 13, G major 9, all have this foundation of a G major 7 guide tone shape. Let's just take a second to talk about the fingering of this last chord. This is a G major 9 sharp 11 chord, and there's a few different ways that you can finger this because it's kind of a difficult chord to finger. The way I just did it was using a slant finger technique, which is essentially using the second and third fingers to play the guide tones, but the first finger is simultaneously fretting or sort of barring the 3rd fret and the 2nd fret. So I'm playing the G on the low E string and the C sharp on the B string. And then I'm using my pinky to play the 9th or the A on top. You may try that technique. If that doesn't work, you can also use a partial barring technique with your third finger. Or if neither one of those work for you, you can try experimenting, if it's comfortable, to use your thumb over the fretboard and then using each finger to play the chord notes. So this approach works just as well for altered extensions, which are extended notes that are raised or lowered by a half step, like the sharp 11 from example 6, usually to create some interesting color or tension to the chord. For example, if you want a G7 sharp 9 or G7 flat 9 voicing, simply start with a G7 voicing, and add an unaltered ninth on top, and then adjust it by moving only the ninth up or down one fret. Let's work through some 2-5-1 progressions in C using these extended guide tone voicings. Example 8 shows a simple 2-5-1 with extensions. One cool feature of example 8 is the fact that the ninth of D minor 9, which is E, becomes a 13th of G13, creating a very smooth common tone in the upper voices. Example 9 adds to the inner voices the same motion that we used in example 4. It's fitting that these notes are called voices. It's good to think of each note on each string as an individual voice. When you can sustain one voice and move one or two others, you really start to bring some life into your chord voicings and your solo playing. The next few examples incorporate altered extensions, which use chromaticism and outside chord tones to create additional tension and color. This first one features a sharp 5 on the G7 chord. Even though the guide tone approach omits the fifth of the chord, let's consider altered fifths, which are the sharp 5 and flat 5, to be extensions, since they're essentially coloring the chord and adding some movement on the top two strings in the same way that extensions do. Once your ears are used to extended chords, you can start to experiment with chords that add an extended note to both of the top two strings. This can yield big 5-note voicings, similar to what a pianist might play. They sound fantastic and are especially useful when playing solo guitar. Now let's go back to our Leaves of Red and Gold study, and now add some extended guide tone voicings. Even as you work through the chord fingerings, try to treat this arrangement as listening practice. Pay attention to when altered extensions are used on 5/7 chords, which extensions you really like the sound of, and then feel free to experiment with other extensions and voicings as you work through this and other tunes. Okay, let's play Leaves of Red and Gold one more time. This time we'll take it a little slower. 1, 2, 3, and... Thanks for joining me in this lesson. For more fingerstyle jazz guitar instruction, check out the rest of my fingerstyle jazz essentials lessons available at acousticguitar.com. For Acoustic Guitar, I'm Sean McGowan.